I'm sure many of you have heard the phrase, it's not just what you say, but how you say it. We have all been in situations where no matter how hard we try, we are unable to convince someone, and they just do not understand our viewpoint, and that can be frustrating. So here we are as a team, including me, Gauri, Vivin, Juliet, and Mohammed, and we will be taking you through some of Robert Cialdini's principles to help you persuade your audience. The first technique, being consistent. It is essential that in the way that you communicate from the beginning till the end, you are consistent in your speech. And one key way to do this is by being repetitive. Now, music is something that best underlines this principle. Think about your favorite song. What do you remember? It's usually the hook. And why is that? It's because it's constantly repeated throughout the song, and it sticks to your mind. Now think about Apple. Now this is one such great brand that has been able to do and speak about repetitive things during their keynote speeches over and over again. And why they do this is because that is what they want you to take away at the end of the speech. So being consistent while using a technique like repetition can really help you persuade your audience. The second technique is being an expert. Now think about a situation. Your audience will only be convinced by what you say if they believe that you have the authority in that subject matter. If they don't, they may not be persuaded enough. Going back to my example of Apple, think about the instance if Steve Jobs were standing here and speaking about basketball. That might not sit very well with you because you don't believe that he has the expertise in that subject matter. But going back to the example of Apple and their keynote speeches, you will be convinced by what he says simply because you know that he has the authority in the subject matter. Now, my team member will take you through some more techniques to help you persuade your audience.
As we grow our expertise, we can learn some techniques about persuasion. People want more of what they can get less of. Brands like Hermes and Louis Vuitton capitalize on those attributes of the people. So when we are practicing, or when we are writing a pitch for a product or a service, it's not only just important to highlight its benefits and its uniqueness, but stress on what are they missing out if they do not buy your product. That's more of an outline with persuasion. Now we have to take a little bit more of a tailored approach. I'll take an example of cross-cultural, like knowing your audience. People from the West have a very individualistic personality versus people from the East usually base their decisions on the collective. So if I want to sell this camera phone in the West, I would highlight about the portrait mode that Apple sells. Why? Because it emphasizes you and blurs your background. But on the East, I would talk more about the wide angle that the camera has so that you can sell the point that you can get your whole family in a picture. So making these subtle changes in your pitch you can actually come closer to closing the deal.
Speaking of subtle changes, so a subtle way to connect with your audience is making sure that there is social proof in what you're talking about. This is Cialdini's sixth principle of persuasion, consensus. I hope you guys are all familiar with the word. So when you would use consensus, for example, is if you're talking with your team or, say, your boss, and you want to pitch a new idea to them. Going and saying, I'm the smartest person in the room, my idea is gold, you should listen to me. Might not be the best technique way to do this. However, if you bring in some data, some items that are happening out in the group, in the public, and figuring out what are other people doing to make a more solid approach on how you're going to get that idea. Let's use an example. You want to add a new customer relationship management system to your company, a CRM. You want to perhaps talk about with your team and bring up the ways that they said they did not like this system. This way, it brings in what they've already said, and it gives them a consensus in the group on the agreement of things they did not like. To bring up, the next approach would be bring up what's already happening out in the system, what our competitors are using, what are some ratings that other people have said that these are the good ways, these are the good systems that are being done, and you can bring in the solutions that these current systems have that your team had problems with. This is one of the better solutions to bringing in a new idea. Now, we've spoken a lot about verbal techniques of persuasion. What are some ways that we could do nonverbal communication?
Now, in order to answer Juliet's question, we're going to take a little bit of a sidestep and build on Robert Cialdini's principles and talk about two techniques that are nonverbal in terms of body language and hand gestures. Now, these can be a great way of making your speech more effective and in turn more persuasive. For body language, we want to make sure we're standing in the middle of the room. If you're standing with a group, make sure your group is in the middle of the room. This emphasizes a position of centrality and everyone in the audience can see you. Make sure that you're facing your audience, not facing your visual aid. Make eye contact with people in the audience and smile if you can. These will all contribute to making you more likable and making your speech more persuasive. Now, in terms of body language, in terms of gestures, we want to make sure that your gestures match the content of your speech. It's going to be very distracting if you're over-gesturing. Every couple seconds, your hands are going in different directions, and if your message is not consistent with what your hands are doing, your audience is going to get confused. For example, if you say, we had huge profit margins this month, it's going to be much more effective than saying, we had huge profit margins this month. Your audience will be confused because your gesture did not match what you were saying. And this goes back to Cialdini's principles of consistency and repetition. If your gestures match your speech, then your audience is going to be continually reminded of what you're saying and remind them of the message that you're trying to persuade them of. Overall, persuasion is both a science and an art and must be tailored to the audience, the context, and the environment you're giving a speech in. Both verbal and nonverbal elements must be combined to make your message the most effective it can be. And in the end, an effective message is a persuasive message. Thank you very much.